if anybody's listened to a presentation by me before, you know, anything's fair game. So if you got questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. We got a small group here, so so feel free to jump in whenever you'd like. So I start out with NMOS is great. Love NMOS. We couldn't do 2110 without it. I'm assuming people are probably fairly familiar with what it is, but for those who might not be familiar with NMOS, it's absolutely crucial to enabling 2110. And you know, we found it very useful here at Ross Video. But you know, one of the questions we came up with in looking at all the good work that AMWO did on NMOS, we said, what about other signal types that are out there? Because obviously not everybody's using 2110 right now. Could we steal some of the ideas that are in there and apply them to other signal types? And you know, kind of the situation we've got at the moment is some of the nice stuff you've got in NMOS, where you have a standardized way of discovering different signals that are out there and establishing connections. That doesn't really exist in non-2110 environments. So we kind of get used to using that in 2110 and said, hey, you know, maybe we could simplify a lot of the other environments that we deal with that are kind of, as we feel right now, artificially complex, because we don't have that kind of capability, and several reasons to want to do that. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but for those who aren't familiar with NMOS, it's a collection primarily of ISs, which are implementation specifications, and this is just a kind of a screen grab of a bunch of them that are out there right now. And we'll dive a little bit into 2 or 3 of these. We're not gonna go into a huge amount of depth on any of this, but the ones that really caught our attention and that have been most useful to us, and I think to most of the industry that's been implementing 2110, has been something called ISO4, which deals with discovery and then registration of streams that are out there. So saying, hey, I've got a 2110 stream, here's my characteristics, registering that in, and then in concert with that, you've got another IS called ISO5, which then allows you to manage those connections. So the two really work hand in glove, the ISO4 and ISO5. You don't really do one without the other. And you know, have found those you know, again, incredibly helpful and really critical in doing 2110 implementations. So again, yeah, fills a needed a gap that really needed to be filled, and really helps us to really control all those streams in there. However, as much as the world has been embracing 2110, 2110 is not ubiquitous. Not everybody is using 2110, or you know, there are particular places that they're using 2110, but it's not the only thing they're doing, right? They have hybrid environments, and so you know, for example, what about media in the cloud? Are you using, you know, you wouldn't be using 2110 for that. You're probably using something else, without being a spoiler of what I'm going to talk about here. So you know, what about those? You know, in a hybrid environment like that, we would love to be able to take, at the very minimum, this ISO4 and ISO5 ecosystem that AMWO's given us and apply it to some of these other transports that are out there. Well, in version 1.3 of NMOS, right now, they do have quite a few transports. You know, most of the common transports are supported today, and I've listed them up there. I won't go through all of them. Very helpful to us. In addition to those ISs I talked about, we've also got a suite of best common practices. And that's really where a lot of the more recent work has been taking place in extending and improving some of the capabilities of NMOS. And again, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide here, but we're going to focus a little bit on the very last one you see down there, the BCP007, which is NMOS with NDI, which is why I'm up here talking. So if you're not familiar with NDI, it's gotten a ton of attention recently in the marketplace, primarily because it's free at a base level. There's a free SDK available for it. People have really embraced it. It's not a standard. It's not anything that SMPTE or AMWO has come up with, but it's kind of becoming a de facto standard to the amount of rollout that it's enjoyed. So you know, what our notion here is, by writing this BCP007, is to say, let's make an environment where NDI devices can use ISO4 to be discovered in an NMOS environment, and then we can use ISO5 to control them. So you know, there are some fundamental differences between NDI and 2110. One of the big ones that we kind of had to get beyond here is the fact that in NDI, your audio, your video, and your metadata are all muxed together, whereas in 2110, they're separate. So, okay, how do we deal with that kind of difference? We've kind of figured that out. We also deal with what we call full bandwidth NDI, with NDI's HX, HX2, HX3, up into NDI 5.5. So there's a couple different ways we can, using BCP007, that we can support NDI in an NMOS environment. So the very first one, this is kind of the simplest use case, is where if you have the sender and receiver, so both sides of the conversation, if both of them understand and can use ISO4, ISO5, then great. You know, that whatever your controller is can discover your NDI streams and it can control them. So that's the best possible scenario. However, it's maybe not realistic 100% of the time. Maybe more realistic is a case where the sender is more of a native NDI device. It knows NDI. It doesn't know anything about ISO4, ISO5, that sort of thing. And so, you know, that in that case, when we've got a controller, it's kind of got to implement its own NMOS stuff in there, because it's not able to rely on the receiver to, or I'm sorry, on the sender to do that. So, you know, how do we do that? Again, this is not intended to be a super deep dive into schema or anything, but, you know, I put a few snippets up here that, you know, some of the basics were, you know, in the schema, create a new transport type. So it needs to know what NDI is. So we've got a new transport type called NDI. Yeah, and you know, on the sender side of things, we've got you know, a little snippet here showing, okay, here I'm the sender, I'm at this IP, I'm using this port. Yeah, here's my name and here's my group name. I mentioned about the multiplex nature of NDI, and so we dealt with that in the schema with a few fairly simple, straightforward changes to the schema to allow this kind of multiplex structure within NDI. So again, I'm not going to go super deep in. If you want to go deep into this, grab a copy of the document. It is available on the MO website, and it's a draft spec. We're hoping to get it finalized by the end of this year. It's also up on GitHub, so handy. You can go and grab that at your leisure whenever you'd like. Like I said, our plan is to wrap this by the end of 2023, have everything published out the door early 2024. My colleague Alan Fryer has been kind of the lead on this effort, and there's his contact information if you've got any other questions on that. So you might think, well, geez, we're only like 10 minutes into the presentation and he's already wrapped up all of his NDI stuff. The reason for that is we're looking at using NMOS for NDI as just kind of a foot in the door. What about other things that are out there that are getting some traction? So if you haven't heard of IPMX, it's the IP Media Experience, and this has been getting some traction in the Pro AV world. And basically, what it is so it's a way to do video over IP in the professional video realm, where they didn't want to get into all the complication that 2110 brings. They looked at 2110 and said, that's kind of cool. It's way too complex for what we want to do. It's not going to fly. But maybe we can steal some of the nice stuff that we like in 2110 and ignore some of the stuff we don't need in 2110 and come up with something else. And that's really, in a nutshell, that's really what they came up with IPMX. And so, you know, again, it's being embraced in a lot of different verticals right now, and it's dealt with a little bit with one of the other BCPs that are out there, BCP006. actually deals with JPEG XS in NMOS, which kind of helps us in this realm. So have we thought about IPMX? Yes, absolutely. And then, what about media in the cloud where you're dealing in AWS? So AWS has their own flavor of a format here called CDI, Cloud Digital Interface. Again, if you're doing video in the cloud with AWS, it's using CDI. And so can we do the same thing with this? Can we use NMOS with CDI? We think we could. We're tackling NDI first, but CDI is on our hit list of things that we'll want to then attack next. What about other things? There's also things like SRT and RIST that are out there. Again, we don't, with what we have done with integrating NDI into NMOS, we don't see any reason we can't do this with things like SRT and RIST as well. They're all IP-based transports, so sure, maybe we can do that. But what about other transports? And I'm going to skip over a slide here. So what about things that are not IP? And the picture kind of helps you with this. Like, well, what about SDI? Or what about HDMI? Those are out there. Those are being used. Could we use NMOS, ISO 4 and ISO 5 with those? The answer is we think, yes, we could. It's not what we have done is not necessarily specific to video over IP. And so, we think that's also possible there. And there has been some work in AMWA around stream compatibility management in another project/document called IS11. So, yeah, this could extend to all kinds of different formats is what we're kind of seeing here. And we think now that we've laid the groundwork with doing NDI, the floodgates could open to all these other things. I also wanted to touch just briefly on, when you're dealing with video over IP, what about security? Security is, it could kind of be ignored somewhat when you're dealing with SDI and you just got cables between devices. But when you're dealing with, media that's going over the network, going over the internet, how do we secure that? How do we deal with authorization of requests for connectivity there? And so there's another answer to that in the NMOS suite called IS10. It's based on, if you're familiar with OAuth 2 from NIST and the whole zero trust tenets, it's based around that, but really optimized for media. And so we think that's a great answer for authorization and securing these streams. So we think that this all fits together and is part of an NMOS ecosystem that's needed for all different format types that you might deal with. So ideally, we want to again homogenize this across all the different format types that you deal with. So to kind of wrap this up here, we think NMOS is great. We think it's got a lot of potential beyond what it's being used for right now with 2110. And you can kind of rest assured work is being done right now on this. And like I said, we've done the initial work on NDI with grand plans for all kinds of other formats that are out there. And if you find this interesting, and if you think this is a worthwhile effort and you would like to get involved, it is absolutely not too late to get involved with this. This is, like I said, it's kind of phase one is the NDI stuff that we're going to wrap up early next year. We would love to have, if you're interested in any of those other formats and would even like to lead the activity, there's no pride of ownership here. We would love to have you step in and you want to lead a RIST activity or an SRT activity, please get involved, and we'd love to have you kind of join the group on this. If you'd like any other information on this, in addition to my colleague Alan's coordinates that were up there before, you can always contact me at Ross Video, and happy to help out getting engaged with this. But again, we think this is an important effort to make the reality that we have here of dealing with multiple formats far simpler going forward. So with that, I've ended much earlier than I thought. But happy to answer any questions. I think we've got a little bit of time if people have questions about this effort. All right. All right. Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.